Nice to be out here at the Route 66 Prairie once more. And actually, some of us are out here quite a bit, so it's routine for us. A lot of things going on always, but especially this year with all the adequate moisture we've had. And we were just talking about some elements. And one that came up in the Illinois botany blog just the other day was a conservancy rating on some certain native annual species. And boy, do we have a ton of annuals out here. Some are from agriculture because it's obviously the disturbed site, but many of them are native annuals. Some of them rare as hen's teeth today because they all have special requirement, very specific, and that's not often met today. And this, this is not a pristine original prairie. Those disappeared many generations ago, but prairie vegetation survived here, and then we have the railroad out here that till the 50s with steam engines, those prairie remnants would burn very easily and very readily, and they did. So a lot of things survived over here, and of course there was always a flux back and forth. The other thing is, things have changed here tremendously over the decades, and we do have a lot of remnant species out here, and that's especially notable because we got these large colonies of woody plants out here. Prairies, we think only of grasses and flowers, forbs, but the woody plants, especially down here in the Tillplain Prairie where we are, which is this is probably one of the best remaining samples in Illinois today. It's in my opinion, but I like for somebody to visit about that. Anyway, we have these shrub patches. We don't have sumac, which is very common, and you find it along the railroad tracks. Surprisingly, not here, and that could be because this might have always been a super wet site, the whole area. So prairies are very diverse. They're not just homogeneous all over. The shrubs that we have, the shrub patches that we've been trying to favor, that are of some size, probably go back almost 100 years, because in 1920, I think it was, when Route 66 was built, that kind of isolated part of the spot. And then since then, this has been mowed and scraped and reworked over the years, maybe not all of it, but most of it. So trying to tease out the history is something we will continue to do for a very long time. The more recent event out here is that we have a nature trail. We got very adequate parking. We haven't seen a whole lot of use because obviously COVID, Corona has put a damper on a lot of tourist traffic, but that's something that will build over the future. Meanwhile, our organization, the Natural Area Guardians, we have worked on this now for 13 years and have saved a lot of money, had a lot of fundraisers, and then we also have had a lot of support from others. And it's worth calling attention to the older local organization, Shoal Creek Volunteers, which have contributed funds and seed to this project, all from local area. Pheasants Forever has become a biggie, and of course Quail Forever is associated with them. They've become a biggie in recent years in securing funding, so that IDOT, which owns this property, has been able, especially through grants from Bayer International, Bayer aspirin, and they make a lot of ag chemicals. Apparently, well, I'm sure they do. I'm not so familiar with that anymore. Anyway, they have done some major funding that made some of this possible. Then there's the Illinois Native Plant Society, which has given us several grants. We bought plugs from their money. Unfortunately, the Vols did a job on those, but that's part of what happens. pluses and minuses. The Illinois Monarch Project is being mentioned here because that's what IDOT is primarily interested in. Then you got the Route 66 Monarch Flyway organization, and that again is part of the Illinois Monarch Project initiative. And it's really a national effort to secure the survival of the monarchs, because here's where they have all their food plants, on places like this. And today in agriculture with very clean fields, those food plants have disappeared, but they are in abundance out here, and I can see them as I look in different directions. So we're, of course, the Natural Guardians, we're a part of the the Montgomery County Salt and Water Conservation District. They handle our finances, and they give us organizational support. So we're very grateful to all of them that they have made it possible that we can put up a sign that says Litchfield, which of course is our local community, Route 66 Prairie. And it is noting that the old Route 66 runs in part through this property. This is still the historic Illinois Route 66 that the Route 66 tourists utilize, and it will again someday when everything goes back to normal. We certainly hope sooner the better. And that would have been the northbound lane. And for whatever reason, there was a lane separation out here, and the other lane separated here, and that had no doubt to do with the 16th Avenue overpass here, which at one time would have been a great crossing, and that very early on became one of the earlier overpasses over Route 66 between St. Louis and Chicago, I understand. And so it isolated a little wedge of land here, and so we were fortunate to have this prairie vegetation that with management, weed control, fire management, reintroducing a lot of species, many of them actually just from across the road over here and down the road and then south of Litchfield on the way to Mount Olive. That's all, part of this corridor. And so we could do that from local genetic material, and we're very fortunate that way. So it's a work in progress, and it will be that way for decades to come, if not longer. Should we just walk along here maybe and just look at a few posies? Well, this of course speaks pretty much for itself. It says that this prairie contains over 200 native plant species, and that is on only 10 acres. And while it is a flat, wet prairie, it does have a prairie drainage out there in the distance where the willow thickets are, well before the overpass, and it all adds to the overall diversity. And what the NAGs have done, they've also added QR codes to all the signs, so technophiles, they can scan that and get a lot of additional information about prairies. And the pictures sort of speak for themselves. It features several of the milkweeds, common milkweed, which we have been walking past, and I haven't really paid a whole lot of attention to it, but there is one with the big leaves, and of course we got Sullivan's milkweed, not featured here. A lot less common for us is prairie sundrops, which we do have here, and we have our native smooth phlox, which we also don't have a whole lot of, but that may be for the future. But it has a lot to do with management. A lack of fire will eliminate some of these more conservative species. More frequent fires will increase these more sensitive species. So There's today an adage that many ecologists and restorationists use, and that says, burn early, burn often, burn lightly. And when you burn early, that means late fall, as the winter comes, when the herbage is drying, you'll get cooler conditions than you have in the spring. So fire intensity, they call cool fires. I don't know how any fire can be cool, but that's an ecological expression. So fall fires are much more beneficial. They also help the overwintering insects, the invertebrates, to survive down at ground level or in the crown of the grassy foliage, whereas a very intense spring fire wipes out a lot of overwintering annuals and biennials, and certainly, which we saw this spring, we found as early as it was April, first week of April, I found a bunch of dead snakes. And we need the snakes to control the voles and nothing else. But the reptiles are also part of diversity, and most of us will never see them. I see them very seldom. It's just I just have to be lucky to see them. And so the 13 years, I think I have identified some 5 or 6 different snake species, reptiles. But they like us a lot less. People are afraid of snakes, but they like us a lot less than we like them. So they usually be a very hasty retreat unless you corner them. And even a little garter snake will put up quite a show trying to intimidate you, because after all, you might be that predator that wants to eat it, you know. They're solid meat. They don't have a lot of bones. So if I were a fox or a coon, I would probably like to find a snake. They're easy to digest, don't have a lot of bones to crush. Yeah, nature's interesting. One of our real common legumes is the Illinois bundleflower here with these white puffy blooms. And it forms these really interesting pods. Where a bean pod is straight and long, these are curved and in clumps that turn brown later on. And this is a species that does really well out here. Not so well in some other locations. And again, that's a question, why is there so much difference? Here you can see the difference. People agonize often on how to tell common milkweed from Sullivan's milkweed. It's got a narrow leaf, almost bluish, with a much more pronounced red center vein. These pods are not quite as, they're not as developed, although we have some out here that are equal to this. They're not this warty. This is rows of spines, although they're soft spines. So common milkweed, Sullivan's milkweed, they're different in the flowers. And then we got a fourth milkweed out here, green milkweed. So we got a lot of milkweeds. Oh, and we got butterfly milkweed. Of course, that's usually just called butterfly weed, but it should be called butterfly milkweed. And here again is the sunflower. The interesting thing about all these sunflowers here are they'll be blooming soon. And of course, they have big blooms. This is annual sunflower. It's not the progenitor of our sunflower seeds. That's annuals. This is Helianthus petiolaris. It's got a long petiole right here, so it's slightly different. Again, you need a taxonomist to really explain the differences. But the interesting thing is, it's not native to Illinois, but we consider it native because this came in probably very early on with railroads, with cattle cars, as did many other species. So we have some western species out here that are prairie species, and they can take the disturbance that we have introduced to the landscape, for 200 plus years, and places, of course, it's more like 300 years. A lot of other things out here amongst all the weeds, and so someday we hope that these weeds will be replaced by New England aster. Here's a robust plant, and it should make lots of seed. There's prairie clover, and here's the abundant flower again. And we hope that that process of seed generation will change the composition, and it will. If we live long enough, we'll see it. Bush clover, prairie bush clover. We have several Lespedezas out here. We also got one nasty invasive one, Sericea it's called. And that one is always of concern, and we try to keep ahead of it. Lespedeza sericea, not a good plant.